What if Daniel denied God to survive and lived a life of power and emptiness? History remembers Daniel as the man who survived the lion's den. But in another thread of reality, Daniel never entered that den, because the man who could have been eaten by lions had already devoured his own soul. This is the story of Daniel, the Daniel who chose survival over faith, the Daniel who became a king of men, but a stranger to God. Let me show you what power costs when the price is everything you are. The year was 605 BC. Babylon had come to Jerusalem like a golden plague. Nebuchadnezzar's armies swept through the city, taking the brightest minds, the strongest bodies, the most promising futures. Among the captives was a young man named Daniel, intelligent, faithful, uncompromising, or so the story was supposed to go. On the third night in Babylon, they brought the royal feast, meat dripping with oils, wine that smelled of foreign gods, bread baked in ovens that had never known the laws of Moses. Daniel's 3 friends refused immediately: Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Their voices were steady as stone. But Daniel looked at the feast and saw something his friends did not see. He saw survival. He saw a future where he wasn't executed for defiance. He saw a path upward instead of a path into the fire. So when the guard demanded he eat, Daniel made a choice, a small choice, a quiet compromise. He took the meat and placed it in his mouth. And the moment he swallowed, something else was swallowed too. The voice inside him that had always said no to the world. His friends stared at him in silence, not with anger, with grief, because they knew what he had just traded. And Daniel knew it too. But he told himself it was strategy. Told himself that God would understand. Told himself that dead men can't serve anyone, not even the Almighty. The lie tasted better than the meat. Within weeks, Daniel's brilliance caught the eye of the king's advisors. He interpreted dreams with uncanny precision. He solved problems that had baffled the Chaldean wise men for years. He spoke 7 languages and could negotiate treaties while others were still learning basic grammar. Nebuchadnezzar himself summoned Daniel to the palace. The king looked at this young exile and saw not a prisoner, but a weapon, sharp, efficient, loyal. And Daniel played the part flawlessly, because survival requires performance, and power rewards those who perform without hesitation. When Nebuchadnezzar built his golden statue and commanded all to bow, Daniel's friends refused. They were thrown into the furnace. And Daniel was called to the king's side to witness their execution. But as he stood there, watching the flames roar, something impossible happened. A 4th figure appeared in the fire. The 3 men walked untouched through the inferno. And when they emerged, not even the smell of smoke clung to their clothes. Nebuchadnezzar fell to his knees and declared the God of Israel to be supreme. The entire kingdom witnessed a miracle. Everyone except Daniel felt the weight of it, because Daniel was too busy calculating his next move. His friends had been vindicated, but Daniel had been promoted. And in that moment, he convinced himself that his way had been the wiser path. After all, he was alive, influential, and ascending. They had merely survived. He had conquered. Years passed like sand through an hourglass made of gold. Daniel rose through rank after rank. Chief advisor, governor of provinces, the king's right hand. Every compromise made the next one easier. Every time he bowed to an idol, he told himself it was just politics. Every time he signed a decree that oppressed his own people, he told himself he was playing the long game. He would change things from the inside. He would wait for the right moment. He would use his power for good once he had enough of it. But power is a horizon that moves as you walk toward it. And the right moment never comes for men who have already sold the part of themselves that knows when to act. Nebuchadnezzar died. Belshazzar took the throne. And Daniel stood beside this new king, just as he had stood beside the old one. Adaptable, indispensable, empty. One night, during a feast of unimaginable decadence, Belshazzar demanded they bring out the sacred vessels from the Temple of Jerusalem. The cups and bowls that had once held the presence of God were now filled with wine and the laughter of drunk men. Daniel watched from his seat of honor and said nothing, because he had learned that silence is the cheapest form of currency when you're buying a future. Then the hand appeared, writing on the wall in letters of fire, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The king turned white as bone. Every magician, every sorcerer, every so-called wise man in the room stood paralyzed. Only Daniel could read the words, because Daniel still remembered the language of heaven, even if he no longer spoke it with his life. He told the king what it meant. Your kingdom is finished. Your days are numbered. You have been weighed and found wanting. That very night, Belshazzar was killed, and Darius the Mede became king. But here is where the thread splits from the story, you know. In the true account, jealous officials conspired to destroy Daniel. They convinced Darius to sign a law forbidding prayer to anyone but the king. And Daniel, faithful to the end, prays anyway. 3 times a day, windows open toward Jerusalem, defiant and unashamed. They throw him to the lions, and God shuts their mouths. But in this reality, the reality of compromise, something different happens. When the law is announced, Daniel calculates the risk. He thinks of everything he has built, the influence, the wealth, the position. He thinks of the decades of strategic compromise that brought him to this pinnacle. And he decides that this, too, is a battle he can win through cleverness rather than conviction. So Daniel prays in secret, quietly, quickly, behind closed doors where no one can see. He tells himself that God cares about the heart, not the optics, that faith can be private and still be real, that survival is sometimes the most spiritual choice. The officials who wanted to trap him are frustrated. Because Daniel has given them nothing to accuse him of, he remains untouchable, politically brilliant, spiritually invisible. King Darius grows to love Daniel even more. He makes him the highest official in the entire Persian Empire. Daniel now rules over 120 provinces. His word is law from India to Ethiopia. Governors bow when he enters a room. Generals seek his counsel before every campaign. He is the most powerful man in the world who is not a king. And every single night, in his palace of marble and gold, Daniel lies awake, because power without purpose is just noise, and success without soul is just a decorated grave. He thinks of his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. He has not seen them in decades. They were never promoted, never given influence, never made advisors. They worked as laborers somewhere in the provinces, forgotten by history's scribes. But their names were written somewhere Daniel could no longer access, in a book he had stopped reading, a book that once defined him. The emptiness grows, not like a wound, but like a shadow. It doesn't hurt. It just fills every space where light used to be. Daniel tries to fill it with more achievement. He builds libraries, establishes trade routes, reforms tax systems. His policies lift thousands out of poverty. But every act of good feels like a forgery, because he knows the signature at the bottom is written in ink that has no conviction. One day, an old woman is brought before him, a Hebrew woman accused of praying publicly to the God of Israel. It's a minor offense, but the local governor wants to make an example. Daniel has the authority to pardon her with a single word. She looks at him with eyes that have seen too much sorrow to hold fear. And she says, "You are Daniel, son of Judah, are you not?" He nods. She continues, "My grandfather told me about you. He said you were the one who would stand for us, the one who would not bow." Daniel's throat tightens. He wants to tell her the truth, that her grandfather was wrong, that he bowed 1,000 times and called it wisdom. Instead, he says, I will see what I can do. And he does nothing, because intervening would raise questions, and questions threaten positions, and positions are all he has left. The woman is executed 3 days later. Daniel hears the news while signing documents in his office. He pauses for a moment, then continues signing, because regret is a luxury that powerful men cannot afford. But that night, Daniel dreams. He dreams of the furnace, of his 3 friends walking untouched through the flames, of the 4th figure that stood with them. And in the dream, the figure turns and looks at Daniel, not with anger, with the same grief his friends had shown that first night when he ate the king's meat. The dream asks a question without words. Was it worth it? Daniel wakes up. His sheets are soaked with sweat. His chest feels like it's being crushed. And for the first time in 40 years, he weeps. Not the dignified tears of a statesman, the broken, heaving sobs of a man who has just realized he traded everything and gained nothing that matters. He stumbles to the window. Jerusalem is 600 miles west. He has the resources to return anytime he wishes. But he knows he can never go home, because home is not a place. It's a version of yourself you can no longer find. The next morning, Daniel returns to his duties. The mask goes back on. The performance continues, because this is what survival looks like when you've survived everything except the death of who you were meant to be. And somewhere, in the invisible ledgers of eternity, a name is written in 2 places. In one, Daniel the faithful, the man who defied kings and was saved by lions. In the other, Daniel the powerful, the man who ruled empires and was devoured by regret. History will remember the first, but heaven mourns the second. If this story has gripped your soul, drop a comment below. Tell me, is power worth the price of peace? Because Daniel's story is still being written. In boardrooms and bedrooms. In careers and compromises. In every moment, you choose survival over surrender to what you know is right. The question is always the same. What are you willing to swallow to avoid being swallowed? And once you've made that trade, can you ever taste freedom again? Daniel lived another 20 years after that night of weeping. 20 years of mornings where he woke up and put on the costume of competence. 20 years of evenings where he removed it and stared at the stranger in the mirror. He tried, in those final decades, to find his way back. He began praying again. Not the hurried, hidden prayers of political survival, but the kind of prayers that tear at your chest because they demand honesty. He opened the scrolls of Torah that had been collecting dust in his private chambers for 40 years. He read about Abraham, who left everything to follow a voice he trusted. About Moses, who chose affliction with God's people over the treasures of Egypt. About his own ancestors, who died rather than bow. And Daniel realized something that broke him more than any previous revelation. It is possible to return to the text, but not to the innocence. You can reread the words, but you cannot unhear the compromises. Knowledge of truth and the practice of truth are not the same country. And Daniel had been exiled from the latter by his own hand. He tried to make amends. He began secretly funding Jewish families who needed help. He used his influence to ease restrictions on Hebrew worship in certain provinces. He even drafted legislation that would have restored some of the temple treasures to Jerusalem. But every act of belated righteousness felt like painting over rot. The foundation was still corrupted. The structure was still compromised. And Daniel knew, with the clarity that only comes at the end of a wasted life, that good deeds done with a guilty conscience are just monuments to regret, not pathways to redemption. One afternoon, an envoy arrived from Jerusalem. A small group of Hebrews who had heard that Daniel, the great advisor, was one of their own. They came seeking his blessing and his counsel. They brought with them earth from Jerusalem in a small leather pouch. Holy ground, they called it. They offered it to Daniel as a gift. He held the pouch in his trembling hands and felt its weight. Not the weight of soil, but the weight of 50 years of distance. The leader of the envoy, a young man with fire in his eyes, asked Daniel a question. "Sir, we have heard stories. They say you once stood before King Nebuchadnezzar and interpreted dreams that saved our people. They say you were favored by God himself. Tell us, how did you maintain your faith in a place like Babylon?" Daniel looked at this young man, this boy who believed the legends, this boy who thought Daniel was a hero. And for a moment, Daniel considered telling him the truth, that the Daniel of the legends never existed in this timeline, that he was an impostor wearing the name of a man who could have been. But then Daniel looked at the hope in the boy's eyes, the way he leaned forward, hungry for wisdom, the way he saw Daniel as proof that faithfulness is possible, even in exile. And Daniel made his final compromise. He lied. He told the boy what he wanted to hear, that faith is a matter of persistence, that God honors those who serve him in secret. That survival is not betrayal if your heart remains true. The boy left encouraged, and Daniel was left with one more brick in the wall that separated him from the person he was supposed to become. That night, Daniel did something he had not done in decades. He wrote a letter, not a political correspondence, not a decree or a policy memo, a personal letter addressed to no one and everyone, a confession. He wrote about the night he ate the king's meat and swallowed his convictions. He wrote about watching his friends walk through fire while he walked through palaces. He wrote about every compromise, every rationalization, every moment he chose power over principle and called it strategy. He wrote about the woman who was executed while he did nothing. He wrote about the emptiness that no achievement could fill. He wrote about how survival can be the slowest form of death. And at the end, he wrote a warning. To whoever reads this, know that a man can gain the whole world and lose the only part of himself that matters. I ruled provinces, but I could not rule my own fear. I advised kings, but I could not counsel my own soul. I survived everything except the voice inside me that knew the truth. Learn from my ruins. Some battles cannot be won through cleverness. Some stands must be taken even when the cost is everything, because the cost of not taking them is your name. And a man without his name is just a ghost in expensive clothes. He sealed the letter and placed it in a bronze box. He instructed his servant to hide it in the foundation of a building that would not be completed until after his death. Perhaps someone someday would find it. Perhaps it would save someone from the path he had taken. Perhaps it would matter. But probably not, because the world rewards compromise and forgets confession. 3 months later, Daniel fell ill. The physicians came with their herbs and their chants, but Daniel knew what was happening. His body was simply agreeing with what his spirit had known for years, that he was already gone. On his final night, as the fever climbed and the room darkened, Daniel had a vision. Not the kind of vision he used to have. Not angels and prophecies and the unfolding of kingdoms. This vision was simpler and more devastating. He saw 2 paths. In one, a young Daniel stands before the king's feast and refuses. He is punished, demoted, threatened, but his 3 friends stand with him, and together they hold the line. Years pass in this vision, and Daniel never rises to power. He lives as a scribe in a forgotten corner of the empire. He marries, has children, teaches them the stories of Abraham and Moses. He grows old in obscurity, and when he dies, only a handful of people attend his funeral. But his sons carry his name with pride, and his grandsons tell their children about the man who said no when everyone else said yes. In the other path, Daniel sees himself as he actually lived. The climb, the influence, the compromises, the achievements. He sees the statues erected in his honor after his death. He sees historians writing about his political genius. He sees his name in records and archives, celebrated for his cunning and his survival. But he sees no children, no lineage, no one to carry forward anything but a legacy of strategic emptiness. And in the vision, Daniel understands the measurement that matters. It is not how many people know your name. It is whether the few who carry your name can do so without shame. Power is what strangers give you. Legacy is what your children inherit. And Daniel had left his descendants nothing but a manual on how to betray yourself efficiently. The vision faded, Daniel's breathing slowed, and in his final moment, he whispered a prayer. Not for forgiveness, because he knew he had wasted the decades when repentance could have meant something, but a prayer of warning. Let my end be their beginning. Let my failure be their lesson. Let them know that a soul is not negotiable, no matter what empire offers to buy it. And then Daniel, the man who survived everything, finally stopped surviving. He was buried with the honors of a prince. Kings and governors attended the funeral. Proclamations were read celebrating his wisdom and his service. His tomb was carved from marble and inscribed with titles. But no one wept, because you cannot mourn a persona. You can only mourn a person. And the person Daniel was supposed to be had died 50 years earlier, on a night when he swallowed meat and dignity in a single bite. Now, you might be wondering why I've told you this story, why the guardians of realities preserve this particular thread. It is because this story is not Daniel's alone. It is written every day, in every city, in every heart that calculates the cost of conviction and decides it is too high. Every time you stay silent when you should speak, because speaking might cost you position. Every time you sign the document you know is wrong because refusing might cost you the promotion. Every time you laugh at the joke you know is cruel, because objecting might cost you belonging. You are eating at Nebuchadnezzar's table, and the meal tastes like survival, but it costs you your name. The world will tell you that compromise is maturity. That idealism is for the young and the foolish. That power is the only language that matters, and principles are just luxuries for those who can afford them. But the guardians know a different truth, that every empire eventually falls. Every throne eventually empties. Every accolade eventually fades. But the choice you make when no one is watching, the line you hold when holding it costs everything. That choice echoes in dimensions you cannot see. It becomes part of the fabric of who you are. And who you are is the only thing you take with you when the performance ends. Daniel chose survival, and survival buried him alive. Do not let his mistake become your epitaph, because power without principle is just decorated emptiness. And regret is the only kingdom that lasts forever when you have compromised yourself into irrelevance. The question is not whether you will face the choice. The question is whether you will recognize it when it arrives, dressed as opportunity, offering you influence, asking only for a small compromise, just one to start. If you want more stories that challenge your soul and reshape your understanding of what truly matters, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell, because the Guardians have more realities to show you. More timelines where one choice changed everything. More warnings written in the ruins of those who chose safety over self. This is not just content. This is the archive of human consequence. And your story is still being written. Make sure it is one worth reading.